Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 16 of the Cultured Pull List. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the original Kick-Ass series. So, without further ado, let us get into that. Hello, everyone. As usual, we are Mike and Luke. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about the graphic novel Kick-Ass. I feel like most comic fans are probably familiar with this, but I'm not sure how much in the pop culture this character is, this series,
Yeah,
and
especially for younger fans, I feel like maybe not familiar with this character.
yeah, which by the way, this series is a little bit more mature, so
Yeah.
we're not going to show anything too crazy, but this is definitely not for kids. So yeah, if you're a kid, go away. Yeah. So before we start the book, I did just kind of want to say a little interesting fun fact. Apparently, the movie, which came out in 2010, which is 2 years after the comics first were published,
Yeah.
Apparently the movie and the comic were developed simultaneously.
Yeah, I heard that.
Like the filmmaker Mathew Vaughn and the other person who wrote it, I don't remember her name, but they worked with Mark Millar and John Romita Jr. worked with them closely, and they did deviate in the movie from the comics, but that was all kind of on purpose and kind of mutually agreed decisions between the filmmakers and the comic writers. So I thought that was interesting. We'll kind of talk a little bit more towards the end about the differences between the comic and the movie.
Yeah.
But before that, let's talk about Kick-Ass, Book 1. Now, this is written by Mark Millar and art is by John Romita Jr. However, they both co-created the character in the story.
Yeah.
And the inker is Tom Palmer. The colorist is Dean White. And the letterer is John Barber. And the original comics that we're covering were published in 2008, which they were published under, I think, the Icon label, which was a label owned by Marvel.
Yeah, that was
at
really
the time. Yeah, it is really interesting. And yeah, the work is owned by Mark Millar, I believe. It's personally owned, but Marvel published it through Icon, and then it was reprinted by Image.
Yeah.
So the book, at least the book I read, was the Image reprint in 2018, but they originally came out in 2008. Okay, so for any of you who aren't familiar with this story at all, really, this is a much more, for the most part, a much more grounded take on the whole superhero genre, and kind of shows what happens when just kind of a normal teenager decides to become a superhero in a more grounded world. And it's kind of like Spider-Man, but even delves even more into the normal teenager aspect of things. And there aren't really any powers involved.
Right.
So yeah, so this story starts out with a voiceover from the main character, Dave Lazowski, and it also shows this guy with in this colorful costume jumping off of a roof, and it's kind of the implication you're kind of supposed to think that this is maybe the main character, but it's not. And he starts just kind of monologuing about through narration, how come nobody's tried to be a superhero in real life. There's so many superhero comics, movies, cartoons, how come no one's tried it in real life? Surely real life, normal 9-to-5 jobs can't be that interesting, that we're that involved with those, and nobody's tried this before. So then it shows this guy in the wingsuit kind of fall to his death. His wings don't open properly. But it turns out this was just some Armenian guy who I guess was inspired by the main character. But obviously that didn't end too well. And then we cut to the main character, Dave Lazowski, aka Kick-Ass, and he's got a car battery hooked up to his groin. That's always a fun situation. And he starts saying yeah, this is what happens in real life when you mess with bad guys. And he kind of has this stereotypical you know, like, oh, well, perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start at the beginning,
Mm.
you know, kind
Right.
of thing. But so then we go. Dave Lazuski through narration and everything kind of introduces himself and kind of says that like he's not really the geek or the jock in his school. He's just kind of like some average guy just trying to exist, you know, just existing.
Mhm.
But you know, he's into a lot of nerdy stuff, especially comic books and superheroes. And he has a crush on this one girl named Katie, but
Yeah.
she is definitely not into him. And there's even like this one scene right
Mhm.
here where he tries hanging out at her the country club she goes to.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Wow, I didn't know you went here." She says, "Yes, you did, you creep. Now get the fuck away from me, loser." You know. So
Yeah.
yeah, they definitely have a future together. So
Mhm.
there's all that, and then he goes back and says like he didn't have a tragic backstory or anything, like, you know, nothing like, you know, Bruce Wayne or something. Like his mom did die when he was 14, but she died
Right.
of a brain aneurysm. It wasn't anything, you know, spectacular. Where
Mhm.
he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna get vengeance for you, mom," you know, nothing like that. And since then, it's just been kind of him and his dad trying to get by.
Yeah.
But he always kind of dreams of, you know, doing, you know, becoming a superhero, even though, you know, this is the real world, at least in this. And he hangs
Mhm.
out with his friends a lot at this comic shop. We see them walking out of the comic shop, and there's actually this really kind of funny conversation between him and his friend Todd. And his
Mhm.
Todd is kind of making fun of the portrayal of Galactus in
Um,
Fantastic Four: Rise of the
yeah.
Silver Surfer,
Yeah.
talking about like a dust cloud. Come on, man, the costume's a classic, you know, yada yada. And Dave is kind of defending the decision and saying like, you know, there's some things in comics that don't work on the big screen, which I do agree with
Yes.
that, but I feel that like the dust cloud was a stupid decision.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he also makes another. This whole conversation is very dated because
Yeah.
he says like, Peter Parker's web shooters wouldn't work in live action, you know, like in a movie, even though, and
Yeah.
since like keep in mind it came out in 2008, which
Mhm.
was a year after Spider-Man 3 came out. So yeah, and
Yeah.
since then we've had two iterations, live action iterations of Spider-Man that have used the web shooters. So
Mhm.
obviously his examples aren't the greatest, and also he's totally geeking out over Joss Whedon's astonishing X-Men run
Yeah.
back
I thought that was
when,
really funny.
yeah, back when Joss Whedon was relevant and not kind of hated.
Yeah.
um, but but it was also before he did the Avengers films,
Right.
so it was
Right.
he was just famous for Firefly and Buffy mostly, I think.
Mhm.
Which I didn't even know Joss Whedon did an X-Men run until this. I was like, at first
Yeah.
I thought
I
it
didn't
was,
either.
at first I thought it was fake, and then I looked it up. I was like, oh no, he actually did do an X-Men run in like 2004.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dave is really into it apparently.
Mhm.
So, but this whole time he's kind of like been talking through the narration and like with his friends even about, you know, like how come nobody has like donned a superhero costume and decided to fight crime, and they're all like, "You're crazy, man, whatever." And so one night his dad like almost catches him, but like he's got his superhero suit thing underneath. I guess he bought like a wetsuit online.
Yeah.
So as soon as his dad leaves for work, because his dad works nights, he puts on
Mhm.
his wetsuit, which I've never seen a wetsuit that looks like this, but you
Right.
know, kind of convenient, but also, you know, it's kind of cool. I mean, it makes more
Yeah.
sense than most superhero costumes where they somehow
Right.
become
Right.
expert costume designers, you know,
Mhm.
in their bedroom with an old sewing machine. Um,
Right.
but so at first he just kind of walks around the city and walks on rooftops and stuff and doesn't really do any superheroing, but he starts working out and eating a high protein diet and puts on some weight. And he kind of lives like he's a superhero without actually doing any superhero stuff.
Mhm.
But apparently, like it keeps him really busy and kind of gives him more confidence and everything. But one night, he finally actually stumbles upon some crime happening. And it's
Mm.
something like really basic. It's just some people tagging, just some
Yeah.
guys tagging outside of a building. But he's like, "Hey, stop that! You know,
Mm.
I'm gonna stop you." And then they get pretty aggressive with him, and he's like, screw it, I'm gonna, he just hits one across the face with this club he has, and they proceed to beat the ever-loving hell out of him. And they even he even gets stabbed. And then he tries to get away, but when he does, he ends up walking into the street and ends up getting hit by a car. And like, this car must have been going pretty fast because it like shatters his spine, breaks his legs, really messes him up. And so he obviously has to go to the hospital, and he's like afraid that they're gonna, he's gonna be found out, and they're gonna tell his dad like, oh yeah, he was in a superhero costume for some reason. But apparently he had the wherewithal, even when he was horribly hurt, to, I guess, take the costume off and throw it like underneath this car. So I'm not sure if it's any better to be like, oh yeah, we found your son naked in the street, but I guess he explains it off as saying he was mugged. But he ends up having to have like a lot of surgeries on his back, and then 3 plates put into his head, and he has to go through like therapy and physical therapy. And while he's lying in bed, like on painkillers and everything, he has like this weird vision of his mom. Being like, hey, if you keep doing this, you're gonna die, Dave. And then he has all this other weird stuff going on, which I'm not sure what drugs they have him on, but so he basically makes a vow to himself that he's never gonna do this superhero thing again. He feels bad because now his dad is saddled with all of these medical bills, but like he even burns his comic book collection. But as soon as he's off his crutches, he puts his suit back on. Well, I guess it's a new one. And he goes out patrolling again. And this time he actually finds some people assaulting a man. They're not really like clear what's going on, but they're beating this guy within an inch of his life. And at first Dave kind of hesitates, and then he just decides to intervene, and he kind of puts himself between the guy and the people assaulting him, and ends up actually like, it's definitely a 2-sided fight, unlike the last time where he just got his shit kicked in. This time he actually like lands quite a few good shots to the point where he's able to fight the guys off, and they're just kind of like, this isn't worth it, man. This guy's crazy, and they run off. And at this point, like, a whole crowd shows up to watch, and some people catch it on video, but the guy he saves thanks him. And in the next issue, we see that the fight was uploaded online, and now like everybody's seeing it, like it's on the news. It's kind of going viral, and that's kind of giving him even more of a high. He's like, wow, I'm an actual superhero now. So now he's doing this, he's fully committed to this thing now, and he gets the name Kick-Ass from, like, I think the video that was uploaded, yes, is Kick-Ass. So that's what he starts calling himself. Then we cut to this guy, this crime boss guy, Mr. Genovese, and whoever this guy is, his lawyer or whatever, is like, have you seen this thing on the news? And they're watching TMZ, and they're showing this guy, and he goes, oh geez, not another one. So it seems like there are others out there that we don't know about yet. So then we see Dave at school again, and he is injured again from that fight, but not as bad. So he just kind of says that he was mugged again. Which is kind of funny. But this girl he's had a crush on, Katie's actually talking to him now, and he's like, oh shoot, seems like she might be into me now. But then he talks to his friend Marty, and apparently everyone thinks he's like gay, or like, no, they think he's like a gay prostitute because he was found naked the first time. So they think he's like, I'm not really sure where they like got the whole gay thing, but they're like, oh yeah, he's a gay prostitute. So apparently she's just paying attention to him because she thinks he's gay, and I guess sees him as gay best friend material. So then he has a little conversation with his dad, and his dad's like, I'm worried about you getting mugged all the time, so here's some mace. And that's kind of like the important stuff about this conversation. But Dave kind of keeps trying to up the ante and tries to pull a Spider-Man 2 and jump between these buildings. But luckily he doesn't go through with it because it's too far, and he's like, screw this, I'm walking. So that's fun. But he also sets up, I think, he sets up a MySpace page, which is another really dated thing. He talks about MySpace and sets up a MySpace page for Kick-Ass. And I believe through that, or like through an email or a website or something, people are sending him like requests to kind of like superhero, like it's kind of like the Equalizer, where like they send him stuff like, I need help with this, and he's like, okay, I'll go take care of it. So there's this one girl who has an ex who is been harassing her, and I guess he doesn't really get any other details. He just knows his address, so he shows up with the guy's address, and it turns out seems he's kind of like a low level crime boss guy, and he's got like his whole posse with him. And he still goes through with confronting the guys, like, you need to leave this girl alone. I don't remember if they say her name. And this guy, Eddie, the crime boss guy, is like, excuse me? Like, you know, if you don't leave, I'm gonna fuck you up. And then Dave is like, yeah, well, yeah, if you don't leave her alone, I'm gonna break your legs. And they're like, excuse me. So then, and then before they can attack him, he uses the mace on Eddie, and then it turns into like an all-out brawl. And Dave is definitely losing. He's definitely outmatched here and outnumbered. And right when it seems like they're gonna kill Dave, a knife or a sword bursts through Eddie's chest, and there's this young girl standing there with a sword, and she proceeds to just massacre the rest of the room, and including even that woman that was hanging out, like her. She ends up just killing everybody there. And Dave is afraid that this girl's gonna kill him at first, and through the narration, we learn that she's only 12. Like he says something like, I can't believe now that she was only 12, but he's afraid she's gonna kill him too, and she says something along the lines of like, don't, like, relax, man, like we're on the same side. Us superheroes have to stick together. And then she proceeds to like leave out the window and like do like a front flip between buildings, and, you know, just all this crazy stuff. And then we see her join this big dude who's also in costume across the roof, across the rooftops. And he just kind of tells Kick-Ass to screw off, and then they both disappear into the night. But Dave now thinks that he's going to be blamed for all those dead bodies, and he's stressing out about that, and even knocks over like his comic shelf. And but it turns out that the police and the news, they blame it on like a rival gang or something, because of a turf war. And he even calls the girl that put him up to this, and she's like, you know, like he tells her it wasn't his fault, he didn't mean to kill anybody, and she's like, no need to lie to me, Kick-Ass, he got exactly what he deserved, you know. So his secret's safe with her. But Dave begins to get really curious about those two people that showed up, those two other costumed people that showed up. So he tries to find them on the internet, but there's like nothing about them. But he does find like this interesting like subculture of people who are dressing up in these costumes, but they're not like doing any superheroing. They're just kind of like doing it for fun. It's, you know, they're kind of just doing cosplay, to be honest.
Right.
And yeah, so he's not able to find anything about these two people, which if you're familiar with this story, you know that's Hit Girl and Big Daddy. But back at school, he's still just like, at first it seems like he's just not denying that he's gay, but now he's like fully admitting pretty much and pretending to be gay so he can still hang out with Katie. So that's, yeah, great. So then we cut to Dave and his friends at this comic shop again, and we see this one kid, Rich. Oh no, wait.
I think it's Chris.
It's what? Yeah, you're right. He's talking to his friend saying Rich. Yeah, I thought it was Chris too. I was confused for a second. He said, yeah, and his friend says that's John G's kid, who turns out to be like, he's a big mob boss who, we assume is this mob boss they keep cutting to.
Yeah.
But Dave says something like, wow, who would have thought that a gangster's kid would be a geek like us? Because he's got like this whole box of comics he's hauling away. So then we cut back to Mr. Whatever, let's call him Mr. G, this crime boss guy, and his people tell him about like all these members of his crew that are being killed by these vigilantes, and they're able to actually get a picture of one of them, or get a picture at one of the sites of the killings, and it turns out it's Big Daddy and Hit Girl, and he basically says like he wants these people found, and they turn him off pretty quick from thinking that Kick-Ass is involved. Like, I think it's mentioned at one point, like, oh, is he involved with them? And so somebody says like, no, I don't think this kid's like killed anybody or anything. So he says like he wants Cheadle to figure out where these people are and take care of them. And he says, where is Cheadle anyway? And then we see Cheadle is in a car in a trash compactor, and he's being interrogated by Hit Girl and Big Daddy. And he rolls over on his boss and tells them information. And he's like, all right, so you're going to pull me out of here, right? And then they just like don't say anything, and just like it keeps going. And clearly he doesn't make it out of that trash compactor. And then there's this kind of cool shot of Hit Girl and Big Daddy. And that is the first half of this book.
Yeah, and before I get started, I think some of these might be out of order. I tried my best to get them in order, best of my memory, but it's just a heads up. Anyway, this half of the story begins with a kind of a flashback. The issue is actually called The Secret Origins of Big Daddy and Hit Girl. And it kind of starts off with them in the field, and he's like shooting her with a gun. And you're like, what's happening? But actually she's wearing Kevlar, and they're like doing like multiple rounds of it. So she gets used to like getting shot. And so she's not like afraid of it when people pull a gun on her. But yeah, she basically talks about how she's not like other girls. She's into guns and stuff, and they eat a bunch of meat. She doesn't like, it mentions that she doesn't like toys or have friends or go to school, but it's actually brought up later that she does read comics. So she's,
okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so they're on a mission, and while they're doing it, Hit Girl's out in the field beating these guys up, and Big Daddy has a sniper rifle. He's poised across the street, and he's kind of quizzing her through like apparently some kind of headset or something while they're talking, and she's getting all the answers right as well as killing everybody, so she's pretty good. And this is they go to their house, and they mention that they kind of move around a lot, like every 2 months or so. And it's brought up that Big Daddy has this big metal case, and that's where all the money comes from. And the Hit Girl mentions Kick-Ass and Red Mist, who maybe this was, I don't know. Red Mist was a superhero that teamed up. I think I might have gotten these issues out of order again. Well, then I got all the pictures, so we'll get to there eventually. But anyway, Red Mist is another hero that teamed up with Kick-Ass, and it's at this point where they kind of mention that Big Daddy was a former cop, and they're going after the mob to avenge his wife's death. And then we cut to the present where Big Daddy and Hit Girl, they want to team up with Kick-Ass, and they said, if you don't team up, we're going to leak your identity on the internet, because it's pretty easy. They said it was pretty easy to figure out who he was, like through his MySpace and all that.
Am I wrong, or was it in the movie that he's a cop, and in the comics he's a former accountant, Big Daddy?
No, that's the twist at the end. He lies to his daughter that he's a cop, but then at the end he's like, no, I'm just a random guy.
Okay, right, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway,
spoilers. No, my bad. No.
Yeah, and then Red Mist is this guy over here, and this conversation basically is kind of a montage of how he doesn't really care about life anymore. But the one thing that's important is that his friend made up a swear word, and that's going to come back later. Punk. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So then he meets up with another superhero called the Red Mist, and at first he's kind of jealous because at this point he'd kind of retired being Kick-Ass. This is one of the multiple times he does it throughout the story.
Yeah, he just keeps doing it.
And so Red Mist is kind of getting popular on the internet, and so Kick-Ass is kind of jealous, and so he contacts him, and then they get together, and it turns out that Red Mist is a big fan, and then they kind of just hang out listening to Danny Elfman in their car and doing drugs and stuff, and like Kick-Ass is under the impression that like, oh, like I'm a weird geeky guy, but he's actually kind of cool. Yeah, and then they kind of drive around a whole lot because they couldn't find any real crime, so they're just kind of talking about what they do to the criminals. But then they come across like this burning house, and they're like, oh, let's investigate. And then it turns out that this one woman, she says her baby's in there, and Red Mist is like, let's just wait for the fire people to show up, and then Kick-Ass is like, no, we got to go in and we got to save this person's baby. But after they enter the building, Red Mist is like, well, we'll just exit the outside and then they won't even know. But then Kick-Ass is like, no, we got to save the baby. Turns out the baby's just a cat, as you see over here.
Right.
But yeah, they rescue the cat and they give it to the woman, and that's good. But what happens is that they get stuck before they escape the building. The building collapses and the firemen come up and they're like, don't do this anymore. Okay, this is stupid. As we see right here, and they're like, okay, but then it turns out that they're not stopping.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. And then we see that Mr. G is watching this on the news, and we actually meet his son who's chilling in the background. We don't really meet him a whole lot, but that's this Chris from the comic book shop.
Right.
Yeah, and then I think this is the part that comes before the flashback that we covered in wrong order. But anyway, so then Big Daddy and Hit Girl, they beat Kick-Ass, and they're like, well, we want to team up with your friend and we want to fight the mob. And then so Kick-Ass he runs over to his okay, so he runs over, he's kind of just like, he wasn't sure if it was high on like adrenaline or just being in the area when Chris was smoking, but he's just like, he couldn't sleep, so he's kind of just running around town. And he ends up at Katie's house, and he's like, well, I'm going to tell her that I'm not gay, but I'm also a superhero. And so he yells it, and then she's like, what's happening? And right before she leaves, and she doesn't really see who it is.
No. Right.
Yeah, and then so this is the night that they set Red Mist and Kick-Ass are going to team up with Big Daddy and Hit Girl. They're going to meet at the headquarters, and they're going to fight the mob. And as they go up, they're talking about how like they don't really want to fight the mob, but they still want to team up, and so they have like ideas for like costumes and superheroes and stuff like that in their little folder. But as they get in, they find out that it was a trap. The mob kind of set everything up, and then we find out that Red Mist is actually Chris. I don't know the last name, Chris G. And then it was all a setup to get Kick-Ass and Big Daddy and Hit Girl. And they knock him out, and then Hit Girl tries to fight back, but she gets shot a bunch of times and falls out of a window. And they finally manage to knock out Kick-Ass, and then we get back to where we started, where he's
right
tied up to a car battery. And it turns out that Red Mist is kind of a psycho.
Yeah.
He's like really enjoying it. And he says that like, there's not any information that you have, but we're going to just torture you anyway because it sounds like fun. Yeah, and they just keep doing that. And then they bring Big Daddy in. And so there's actually like a 10, 12-minute time jump where it says that like he kind of told them everything. Kick-Ass told them everything. But then they bring Big Daddy in, and Big Daddy didn't tell them anything except at this point where what we talked about earlier, he reveals that like, yeah, I'm not actually a cop. I'm just an accountant, just a regular dude who's kind of bored. And so I kidnapped my daughter and we turned into superheroes. And it turns out what's in the case is a bunch of old Marvel comics, and he's selling them to fund his vigilante thing.
Well, I mean, he's got some originals, looks like, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, the Hulk, X-Men, Iron Man, Spider-Man, the Avengers.
The original Amazing Fantasy looks like.
Yeah.
Amazing Fantasy 15. Yeah, that's pretty, yeah.
Yeah, and so the mob guy's like, well, why are you going after me then? And then Big Daddy's like, well, we just needed a bad guy, so we just chose you. And so, yeah, they kill him, and then they start they're gonna go back to torturing Kick-Ass, but he's like, well, he kind of in the internal dialogue says he comes up with a plan, not a great plan, but he's like, well, and then so he starts taunting the mob guys. He's like, why don't you kill me with your hands? And so they manage to punch him a bunch of times and then knock him out of the chair. And he did this because actually in the first accident when he got hit by the car with the gang that was tagging the wall, he
3
actually had
metal plates.
metal plates in his head, so he doesn't feel the head trauma as much. So they able to knock him out and then break the chair, and he's able to get up and then start fighting again. And that's right when Hit Girl shows up as well. She rescues him, and they kill everybody, and then they go up. Yeah, they go up the elevator to like the main like meeting area where all the mobsters are. And then they're like, well, we're just going to stand by the elevator and we're going to shoot him. And then Hit Girl mentions this thing that was brought up earlier that I didn't mention. It was like condition red, which is heavily implied to be just like cocaine or something like that. And she just snorts it, and then they break the lights in the elevator. And right when the elevator opens, there's a bunch of bullets, but they don't actually hit anybody. And then Hit Girl pulls out a flamethrower and she burns them all down. And then runs out and saying it's clobbering time. Yeah, like we mentioned, this was published by Marvel, so there's like a lot of Marvel references throughout.
Yeah,
that's one of them. Yeah, and then she burns them all down. And then we find out that Red Mist is kind of just hiding in the bathroom. Kick-Ass goes out to look for him. And then he pulls a gun on Kick-Ass, but he just beats him with a chair leg. And then we go to the kitchen, which is maybe the most brutal part of the whole book. In the kitchen, Hit Girl just mows down all of the guys, like she's shooting them, cutting their heads off and stuff. The Johnny G has a meat pulverizer, and he goes to hit her with it, and then Kick-Ass comes in at the last minute and shoots him in the balls. And he's like, "Oh no, you hit me in the tongue," which is the swear word that he turns right up, which is like, "Oh, that's getting traction. That's funny."
That's funny.
And then then Hit Girl hits him in the head with a meat cleaver, and then they just kill all the guys. And at the end, there's this brief moment of humanity. It's like, my dad just died. Can you give me a hug? And so they hug, and it's fun. And then kind of at the end, where it says, we inspired a lot of people to be superheroes, but then we kind of just retired. And it turns out because Big Daddy lied to Hit Girl that her mom is still alive. So then she goes, hangs out with her, and she doesn't fight anybody except for these bullies that want to steal their money, and then they go to the hospital. But yeah, life's good for her, but not so much for Kick-Ass, who wants to tell Katie how he really feels, and then she's like kind of creeped out by it. So she sends her boyfriend to beat him up. And and then he comes back home later that day. Turns out his dad is dating the woman who called Kick-Ass earlier, who was dating the mom.
Oh my gosh.
And and they're hooking up, and then it ends. The issue ends with the same guy from the beginning with the wings that mess up, and he dies. And then the final panels is Red Mist, who's plotting his revenge. And that's Kick-Ass.
Yeah. So, had you read this? I mean, I assume you were familiar with this, but had you?
I'm a big fan of the movies, but I've never read this book before.
Okay, yeah, it's the same here. I've seen the movies a couple times, but never read the book. Knew there were differences, and I knew they had been developed at the same time. But So, what'd you think?
I really liked it. I thought it was really good. I think the big difference is that the movie, it seems to glorify this kind of vigilante lifestyle and seems to be wish fulfillment in a sense. But this book seems to be more condemning it. Like this, if this would happen in real life, it wouldn't be cool. It would kind of suck. Yeah. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if you've seen Taxi Driver, but it has a similar idea, similar theme to Taxi Driver. And and especially how it ends, how when I don't remember his name, Kick-Ass, Dave. When Dave kind of reveals how he feels to Katie, she's like, normally I feel like in the movie, they end up together and they fall in love, but then in the book it's no, they don't. That's a creep. He's a creep. And so I feel like the book is definitely more realistic, which I mean, it's not a good thing or a bad thing. I like the movie and the book a lot, but that's the major difference I picked up on.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. I really liked it. I liked that this was a more mature story.
Mhm.
Which comic books are generally more like in the PG-13 range. You get
Yeah.
some that are more R-rated, but I think just a handful of them are like this graphic. But I thought that was
Mhm.
kind of fun, and I really like John Romita Jr.'s art. Like his art's really iconic, I
Oh yeah,
think. And like
for sure.
I'm mostly familiar with him from like his work on Superman and Spider-Man. So it was
Mm.
interesting to see his art style like with this more graphic, bloody stuff, which
Yeah.
honestly I thought was really cool. Like he was kind of like
Oh
at
yeah.
his best almost, I think, in
Mhm.
this book.
Mhm.
It was very fun and yeah, pretty similar to the movie, especially the first half is like almost beat for
Yeah.
beat with the movie, which makes sense if it was developed at the same time.
Mhm.
I think the major differences kind of wanted to talk about. I think first off, I think cosmetics. I think they changed a lot of the costumes. Like
Yeah.
Kick-Ass's looks pretty much the same, but
Mhm.
which actually they did a super good job adapting it
Yeah.
to live action. And I think Aaron Taylor Johnson does a really good job.
Oh yeah, he's
It
great.
was like before he was like in a lot of stuff,
Yeah.
um, and before he was married, so I think he would just um, Aaron Johnson, I think. Uh,
Okay.
but yeah, so and I think this is his first comic book role, I believe. But he's played
Mhm.
3 comic book characters now, including
Yeah.
Craven when that comes out. But I
Mm.
think the biggest differences I think are in Hit Girl and Big Daddy's
Yeah.
designs.
Yeah.
Um, Hit Girl looks very very different, and Big Daddy looks very much inspired by Batman.
Mhm.
Whereas it's not really. It's kind of hard to pinpoint what he was going for in the comics.
Right.
And then Red Mist looks very different. I think
Oh
he
yeah.
looks like incredibly stupid in the movie, which I think is kind of the point.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
whereas in the comic, he doesn't really look that much more ridiculous than anybody else.
Mhm.
And then the dad, who's played by Mark Strong, looks pretty much the same, but like he's a little more like bald and everything.
Yeah.
But uh, and yeah, there is that one scene, like his first time
Yeah.
actually fighting crime. This like scene's almost exactly like a panel from the book, him like
Mhm.
crouching over the dudes. I thought that was pretty cool. I think the
Right.
biggest differences though come from like probably the last third, where
Yeah.
he ends up getting with Katie in the end. Basically just like coming through her window, like I'm kick ass and I'm also straight, and they're like, oh okay, let's bang then. Um,
Right.
and also the very end is more like this crazy spectacular like superhero showdown with like
Exactly.
a
Yeah.
jetpack for some reason.
Yeah.
Um, I will say the differences that I like more in the book are definitely the ending.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like I understand why they went this, because this was 2010. Superhero
Right.
movies were like just getting started, and I don't know if audiences really had a stomach necessarily for all of the stuff in the book.
Mhm.
Like it worked really good. I think now they definitely could because of Deadpool and like
The
Kingsman. All those
boys and
kind of
stuff like that.
movies
Yeah.
have come out that are like much more mature and graphic, and even like Logan, that I think people would definitely accept that
Mhm.
the original story more if they'd adapted it. But at the time they were they were still trying to toe the line of like what Hollywood audiences, what movie audiences would be okay with.
Yeah. The movie is still really violent, but it's definitely
Yes.
lighter in a sense, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, and apparently the big thing, because apparently like Matthew Vaughn had it like written, and he was trying to sell it to
Mm.
different studios,
Yeah.
and nobody would pick it up.
Mm.
And I think like the big thing was that they didn't like Hit Girl being a kid. Like they thought that was going
Um,
too far. They wanted her to be a teenager or an adult. But then the creators were like, yeah, but then people are gonna like she's gonna get sexualized, and Hit Girl's not supposed
mm.
to be sexualized. So they wanted to
Right.
keep her a kid. That was kind of like a non-negotiable. And yeah, apparently after being rejected by every studio, that they approached Matthew Vaughn, raised the budget for the movie at a dinner party,
Mm.
and he made the movie independently, and then he sold the movie to Universal
Mm.
for more than he had met with them, but he sold it for more than he had originally asked for. And this is also this kind of a fun fact I found, and I've kind of heard it before, but apparently Hit Girl's first entrance wasn't working very well when they were first filming it.
Mm.
So it was actually the actress's mom, Chloe Grace Moretz, her mom suggested that they revert back to the comic book line where she used the C word. It's kind of funny that her mom's like, yeah, go ahead,
Yeah, go
honey.
for it.
Swear as much as you want.
Yeah.
Obviously, and like she's even said in interviews, Chloe Grace Moretz, that like in real life she'd get in big trouble for swearing like that, you know, and like in interviews she wouldn't even say kick ass. I think she said like kick butt or something. It's kind of funny. But yeah, let's see. Mark Millar, who created it, he said that they went more for like a chick flick when they made the movie, which I don't. It sounds like a negative thing, but he meant more because they softened Katie's character.
I think like more mass appeal is probably a better way to describe it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Which like because when I first read that, I thought he was like making fun of the movie, but he wasn't, because they made it together and they like ran everything past each other. But like they made Katie less of like I don't know, much less Mean Girls, I guess. And that's what somebody said, I think. Yeah. And they had her and Dave get together, which like I like, but at the same time, it feels really random in the actual movie to me. Like he just shows up at her window and be like, yeah, I've been lying to you this whole time, and I'm also a superhero. And she's like, oh, well, in that case, come right in. Let's have sex,
Right.
I think maybe like, and that kind of brings me to stuff that I think the book did better, which we were kind of talking about already. But like I wouldn't have minded them getting together in the book, but I think if it had been like felt more natural, I guess.
Right.
And also I think I really like the book ending more. I feel like the movie, like they were purposely trying to be more like bombastic and superhero comic booky, but I feel like it kind of almost like takes away a bit from like the whole groundedness of the rest of the movie.
Right.
Like not to say it's like a bad movie at all, but yeah, I definitely prefer the comic ending, and know, I know why they changed it, but I will say I think even though it's very Batman-esque, I kind of prefer this the design.
Yeah.
And I really like Nicolas Cage and what he does with the character. And I definitely prefer, I think, that he is actually a cop as opposed to just an accountant. Like I feel like it makes more sense that he, has comics and stuff and like actually has a way of making money. Whereas in the movie, I don't think they really ever say. He just kind of has a bunch of money somehow. But I kind of prefer his motivation. And I feel like it makes more sense him being that much of a like. He definitely seems trained, and I feel like how would he get that training if you were an accountant?
Right.
It makes a little more sense that he's a cop, and I feel like it gives his character more motivation because he was like, wasn't he sent to prison like falsely accused or something?
Yeah.
I kind of like that whole motivation and like arc for his character and everything, and feels like, because I feel like Dave's thing is just being a random guy, like just a normal guy who's like, I want to be a superhero, and so like that's the wish fulfillment thing. I feel like Big Daddy, it makes more sense that he's got something special about him, that. But there's, I feel like there was something else, but right. In the sequence where they in the movie, in the sequence where they discuss Big Daddy and Hit Girl's backstory, there's actually art by John Romita Jr. Which apparently it took them 2 years to make that sequence, which is really interesting. But I wonder why it took that long. But because it was kind of a 2D and 3D animated.
Yeah, it was a lot of CGI, which I mean, I don't know, back in 2010, maybe it took some time to do that.
And it was the same John Romita Jr. and the same inker as the book. Actually, all the same artists who worked on the book did
that's nice.
And apparently Mathew Vaughn gave John Romita Jr. carte blanche on the art direction for the sequence, so he pretty much was able to do whatever he wanted, which is probably why it looks so good. No, but when I think when I rewatched it, not when I first watched it, but when I rewatched it like last year or something, I saw that and I was like, that's John Romita Jr.'s art, and then I looked it up and I saw that like they were developed together, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I thought that was a cool addition.
Yeah.
To it. And I kind of wish they would do that more, like make comics and movies at the same time. Like, it's not always very feasible because you kind of have like a big studio backing you, but I feel like it works really well when at least the people who wrote the comic work on the movie.
Yeah.
Which it does seem like James Gunn kind of wants to do that with the DC stuff. So I really hope they do that. That would be pretty cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was Kick-Ass Book 1. We are going to be covering a lot of Flash books coming up next. We're going to have I guess we're going to call it our month of Flash, leading up to the Flash movie. It's kind of covering books that are going to tie in at least a little bit to the movie that the movie's inspired by, plus just some other cool Flash stories. So if you're a fan of the Flash, you're going to like what we cover next. If you're not, I would suggest this watching anyway.
Other episodes you can watch in the meantime.
That too. Yeah. So before we wrap up, let's do our cultured picks. Yeah. Now, what was yours this week, Luke?
This week I picked, it came out, I think about a month ago or so. It was Superboy Man of Tomorrow issue 1. And this was the winner of the round robin on Twitter, where every year DC will just have a poll and you can pick. And this one won the vote for last year. Okay. Yeah, it's really cool. It basically starts out with Superboy. He's in Metropolis and he's like, he doesn't really know where to fit in because there's all these super people kind of fighting around, flying around and solving crime and all that. So he kind of just goes out into space looking for something, and then he stumbles across this planet, and then he rescues the people there, and then at the end he meets this new team. I think they're called the Cosmeteers. I don't remember correctly, but there's like this new team that this is introducing, and so it's a whole new group of superheroes, and so this is the first in like a mini series. So it looks pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be 6 issues, like the John Kent one. Do you know why he's kind of gone back to his original look as opposed to either the T-shirt or like the New 52 type suit?
Yeah, I'm not sure. There was a tie-in for Dark Crisis. There was a Young Justice tie-in that had all of the characters kind of go back to their 90s looks, and so this might be a continuation of that. I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, interesting. So my pick this week is Punisher #1 that came out last year. I think they're like on issue like 14 at this point, but I just picked this one up the other week, and I had read some of the more recent like one-shots that they came out with the Punisher, but this is like the first one that establishes him as like basically like the enforcer / kind of leader of the Hand. And I know what happens later, but right now, like in this first issue, they don't really like reveal how they got him to join necessarily, but you kind of guess because they show him on like a mission, and it's really interesting because he doesn't use really guns anymore. He uses swords. Yeah, like members of the Hand do, and there's even like a comment at one point where like he feels like he botched a kill or something, and goes like, "Oh, I'm still getting used to these." But there's also these flashbacks where it shows the Hand just like showing up in his apartment and like attacking him, and he kills like pretty much all of them. But then like their leader steps out, who's like, "Oh, you passed the test," basically. "Oh yeah, you're gonna be our." I think they call him like the fist of the Hand. But there's kind of suggested, and we learn later in the series that he's actually like going to be a vessel for the Beast, which is like the entity that's basically like the Hand's god. But I think it's a really interesting place to take the Punisher. And I thought that like the art was really cool in this, and I really liked the Punisher. So it was just like a really interesting Punisher book. And at the very end, we see that Maria Castle is alive and living with Frank now. And it seems like what the Hand did was promise him, like he'll be able to kill bad guys, which, isn't really necessarily the case. The Hand doesn't always just kill bad guys, but also will bring your wife back. And she does have scars where bullet holes were. So it seems like they did like straight up resurrect her, which they've done in the past, like with Elektra and other people. Yeah. They're kind of like the League of Assassins of Marvel, like with the League of Assassins has the Lazarus Pit, that the Hand has some process they go about reviving people. But I thought that was pretty cool, and it's kind of, this whole series so far since last year with the Punisher has been, him with the Hand, and he and Daredevil are kind of on opposite sides of this big war between, I think it's like the Hand, and I forget what the other one is called. But yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. Yeah. So I'll definitely be picking up more of these books, but I hadn't read the first one, and I thought I'd talk about it. So that is our show for this week, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you would like to help support us, you can check us out on patreon.com/theculturednerd. And if you would like to support me and Luke specifically, you can find our shows tier on our Patreon page. Thank you so much to all of our current Patreon supporters. I have been your host, Michael Malalo, and my co-host is Luke S. Our logo and our visual assets were designed by Jose Navarro, and our intro was designed by myself. Thank you again for joining us. Please be sure to like and subscribe. And you know what? Leave a comment if you want us to cover more of this kick-ass series at some point. Because there are a lot, and there's even like kind of a reboot with like new characters and stuff. Yeah. So if you want us to cover more, let us know. And if you would like to check out The Cultured Nerd on social media, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left. And if you would like to check out Casual Experts, which is me and Luke's other brand, we have our own podcast and YouTube and social media, you can go ahead and scan the QR code on the bottom right for those links. Until next time.
Peace.